Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and today we are going to talk about nutrition and mood food, beyond comfort food. I have Mary Mellady here with me. She is the TMC Director of Connected Health and Wellness. I know many of you know Mary. She does some great presentations for us all about our nutrition as a registered dietitian. Welcome, Mary. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Maya. Thanks for
So
having
I will go ahead and put your PowerPoint up for you, Mary, and let you get started. If you're watching, please, if you've got any questions for Mary, please leave them in the chat and we'll address those afterwards. Thank you.
Good morning. So I clearly mistitled my presentation because apparently it was called Mood Food, not Food and Mood. So it's all the same thing. I am going to give a disclaimer and tell you that number one, I am not an expert in this topic because number two, there is still so much upcoming research. Anything that I present today is going to be more of a correlative kind of rather than causal, okay? And I will also give you a disclaimer that when I was putting this together, my thought that kept coming into my head was, well, duh, that makes sense. So if you all think the same thing, that's good. That means that you are as smart as I am, which is very easily done. But anyway, there is so much coming out about how food affects our mood. Whether you see it in just a part of an overall article or whether you hear folks talking about it, or as more research comes out. Most of what I will tell you is going to feel a little repetitive because I feel like I say the same thing in every class, which is that we need to eat healthier, correct? All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what the current research does tell us. We're going to talk about that gut-brain connection. We are going to see over the course of the next 10, 20 years, more and more research that proves that what we eat and how happy our gut is going to impact our overall health, whether it's our brain, whether it's reducing our risk for chronic disease, whether it's helping with mitigating our risk for other types of diseases such as cancers. That it is so important that we take really good care of our gut. We are going to talk a little bit about protein and fatty acids and how that impacts our mood and our brain, and also inflammation and mental health. And inflammation leads right into that Mediterranean diet, which I talk about in every single class. So we all need to move to the Mediterranean, clearly. I will just review a few of the specific nutrients that seem to help improve our mood. And then I'm going to talk about a few other little things just to kind of wrap it up. Okay? All right. So what does the research say? Drum roll. Good nutrition is in fact protective for factors such as depression and other mental health disorders. Depression and anxiety is the most common health condition worldwide. And while initial research shows a lot of promise around that good nutrition can be impactful and help to be preventative for both depression and anxiety. And it kind of seems logical after we talk through it a little bit more. More research is definitely needed for any kind of definitive statement. We looked at, so in a meta-analysis, what that means is somebody has looked at a whole bunch of research articles. It's kind of like it's a human version of the new AI, where it pulls together all the most common threads. And what it came to is that there seems to be a 30% decreased risk for depression for those that eat the Mediterranean diet, and that it seems to be efficacious, meaning that it is a good treatment for major depressive episodes. There's a little caveat to that we're going to talk about a little bit later. There seems to be a clear link between obesity and depression. People that had a higher vitamin D intake had decreased risk for depression. That was interesting to me. And it was intake. It was from food. It wasn't just those that were outside in the sun. So they eliminated that as a factor because in my mind, being outside also decreases our risk for depression if we are out being active and enjoying nature. There seems to be a link between high carbohydrate as well as highly processed diets and an increased risk for depression and other mental health disorders. So when I'm talking processed foods, that kind of goes hand in hand with those high sugar foods, right? Like baked goods, any kind of processed drinks and things of that nature, pre-processed entire meals that have a low nutrient density. And that it will tie that also to the fact that highly processed foods and meals seem to also be linked to increased inflammatory response. We've had that discussion before, and has a poor impact on our gut health. So think about all of those things, how they all interact. Processed food increases our inflammation, upsets our GI tract, also linked to chronic disease as well as mental health disorders. Okay, so it's this, we're starting to see all of these pieces kind of come together and really make sense. And then more research is definitely needed, like I talked about, to determine the causal role of improved immune function and depression versus just a kind of a correlative role. So that's what I found in the research. Again, a lot of it is very new. Like most of this research is been looked at since around 2020 and sooner. So food and nutritional science, I think I've said this to you year over year, is still such a new science that people and scientists are really looking to as food is medicine. Okay. So what is that gut-brain connection? I've talked about this with regards to our brain health, our heart health, and now we're going to talk about it, how it relates to our mental health, is that there is so what happens here in that gut brain? There is a bidirectional communication. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. Sorry there. There's a bidirectional communication that happens along the vagus nerve that goes from our brain to our gut. So there's this direct line of information. And we've known about that for a long time, right? But we just didn't know how much information and how much that gut told our brain, right? And so there's a decrease in dopamine when our gut health is compromised. And this can change our mental well-being. So dopamine is that feel-good hormone, right? That makes us, it gives us a sense of pleasure. It helps motivate us when we're feeling down. If we get that burst of dopamine, then we seem to be in a better mood, right? It also happens to be a neurotransmitter, which helps with many of our cognitive functions, such as memory. So that's why we've talked about that gut-brain connection in regards to our brain health. One study showed that patients with, and this was a super interesting study that a group took the time to do this, that they looked at a group of patients with various mental health disorders, one like schizophrenia, bipolar, depressive disorders, and I think they even looked at a group of autism patients. And they pulled out, they did studies of their GI health, and they could link that with each one of these very specific mental health disorders, they had a higher level, unique higher level in each one of those disorders of a certain harmful bacteria in their gut. Isn't that super interesting? So they could align, somebody with schizophrenia had this higher level of this certain unhealthy bug in their gut, and then versus somebody with autism. So what I think they were showing there is that our gut can both be detrimental to us, and we can kind of link it to some of these disorders, which we know also has a genetic component. So that bears the question, is our gut health, does it come from our genetics, and how do we impact that? So there's going to be a lot more research there to be done, right? And then the gut microbiota helps to regulate the production of both serotonin and the dopamine that we talked about. So serotonin also helps to regulate our moods as well. So we want both of those neurotransmitters. They act as a neurotransmitter. They have a hormone component to them, but they are both produced by our GI tract. So if we don't have a healthy GI tract, it makes sense that we wouldn't be very happy, right? Yeah, okay. So we want more research around that to make that an actual fact rather than just all of us brilliant people in this room saying, yeah, that sounds right. They're also looking at protein and fatty acids. And there's a little bit different swing here with this. So think about it. When your blood sugar is low, there's an actual term for what happens to us. What is that? We become hangry. We're hangry. Oh, well, that's the technical term. Yes, we become hypoglycemic, but most of us call it hangry. They even have Snicker bars commercials about it. You must be hangry. So here, eat a Snickers. So people experience this, right? When our blood sugar drops, we're not happy. Does everybody concur? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. There's a shaking of heads in the room. And so so in addition to protein in our diet helping to create we need to provide our body with amino acids to produce those neurotransmitters, but the protein also helps to regulate our blood glucose. So if all we eat is a highly processed, high carbohydrate diet with not enough protein, our blood sugar goes up, right? And we feel really good for a little bit, and then our blood sugar dives, and then we don't feel so good, and then we get like lightheaded, or we get grumpy, or we get tired. We get more mood swings. So that protein helps our blood sugar not to do that dramatic dive, but to level out a little bit more, because it takes a lot longer for our body to process and utilize that protein. So it slows down how quickly the glucose flows into our blood. Studies have shown an improved concentration with high protein breakfast. Now, this is primarily in kids, but it can be applicable to adults as well. Adults, I can't tell you how many people I talk to, and they say, I'm just never hungry at breakfast, so I never eat breakfast. Okay? And how do you feel in the morning? Well, I need my cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're relying on caffeine rather than a nutritional source to help give them that boost. But it still doesn't help with that concentration. It just wakes us up, right? It doesn't help us to focus. Whereas the research does show if we eat a high protein breakfast, that we have a better concentration. We're more productive in those morning hours. So that's great. Did you know that our brain is 60% fat, about? And so that's the fatty acids. We need essential fatty acids to help our brain function. And most of that we get from food. The special thing about omega-3 fatty acids is it has some inflammatory properties. And we talked before about how inflammation can be linked both to chronic disease, but also to an increased risk for depression and other mental health disorders. So again, these foods that we know are healthy for us to help with chronic disease, to help with specifically with heart disease and brain health, are now coming out that this can also help with our mood and with our mental well-being. And then MCT oil, we need a lot more research around this, but their belief is that MCT oil may be able to provide an alternative source of fuel, especially for people with epilepsy and Alzheimer's. So it's more, so using the MCT oil allows our brain to use some ketones for its brain function versus just glucose. So again, a lot more research needs to be done on that, but preliminarily, when they have used MCT oil with Alzheimer's patients, they've seen not a reversal in symptoms, but a slowing of progression. So
What was the MCT?
MCT stands for medium chain triglyceride oil. And so, you know what, I even actually saw a coffee drink the other day that had MCT oil in it. It's very interesting. So people are looking to that. MCT oil is often used in those super high protein, low carb diets when they're trying to actually induce ketosis in the body. All right, so now inflammation. We've talked a lot about inflammation whenever we talk about the Mediterranean diet. But there seems to be an increased risk with an increase in inflammation in our body and depression scores. And they think that this happens because there's a change in both in our brain chemistry and in this hormonal disruption. So chronic inflammation changes some of that brain chemistry and increases our risk for depression. And it also changes the balance of those neurotransmitters. So what it does is it drops the level of serotonin, which makes us feel good. And it also increases that level of cortisol. That's that stress hormone. So when we're experiencing inflammation, it's doing this teeter-totter of increasing the cortisol that really makes us feel stressed. It's that flight or fight feeling that we have, as well as decreasing that serotonin, which is the hormone and neurotransmitter that helps us to feel good and happy. Insulin and dopamine. So insulin resistance, which can occur when we eat a highly processed diet, which can then lead to more inflammation. So if we aren't processing our glucose because we have insulin resistance, there also is linkage to an increase in dopamine clearance, which means even if our body is producing dopamine, with insulin resistance, it's pulling it out of our body much more quickly. So we don't get the benefits of that dopamine that we're producing. Okay. So if you think big picture, rather than these individual points, we eat an unhealthy diet that's high in sugars and processed foods. That increases both our risk for chronic disease, which may look like diabetes and or heart disease. In both those cases, we have an increase in inflammation in our body. There's an inflammatory response to what is happening because we aren't processing this unnatural food as well. We have higher inflammation, so our cortisol levels spiral up, and those other levels of dopamine and serotonin drop down because our gut is not happy. We're not feeding it the food it needs to be happy. So now we have a higher level of stress hormones, a lower level of happy hormones. It would seem pretty obvious that we wouldn't be happy, right? And the research that says that obesity is linked to depression. Let's think through that. Generally, people that are struggling with their weight also are either not, they have some other chronic disease, right? With when we gain weight comes typically a chance for higher blood lipids, whether it's cholesterol, triglycerides, chance for increased glucose. Both of those things cause inflammation within our body. We have an inflammatory response. So that means our gut isn't happy. That means our brain is happy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I hope.
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of this is common sense, but we still need the research, right, to prove the nuts and bolts of it and the what. All right, so the Mediterranean diet. I'm sure you all can recite this, right? Because I talk about it every single time. And it's basically a low processed food diet. where everything fits in moderation, where we're eating more grains. We aren't on a zero carbohydrate diet, but we're choosing healthy carbohydrates. Whole grains being brown rice and whole grain pastas, not processed pastas, not processed breads, not white breads, that we're looking to have whole wheat as a first ingredient in any of the bread kind of products that we're eating, that we're not snacking on potato chips and things of that nature that are highly processed and high in saturated fats and high in salts, that we're choosing lean protein. Did I put fish on here? So lean proteins, including fish. We recommend that you have 2 days a week where you have a source of fatty fish, specifically for that omega-3 fatty acids. A lot of the research says that even if we take a supplement of omega-3 fatty acids, it doesn't act in our body and have the exact same benefits as if you get it from food. Okay? Some vitamin supplements can act pretty similar, but not always to the real food source. So always getting our vitamins, minerals from food sources is always the best. So if you don't like fish, if you're not getting a source of omega-3 fatty acids, then that's when you would want to take a supplement. But otherwise, trying to get fish in there twice a week. Choosing plant-sourced proteins. So there is a thing called Meatless Mondays out there where we try to encourage that 1 day a week, and it just happens that it goes, the alliteration of Meatless Monday works. But if that's not working for you, if it's a Friday or if it's a Wednesday, that's okay too. But trying to encourage 1 day a week where you don't have any animal product or animal sourced proteins, where you get your protein from beans or nuts or something of that, or if you eat soy from soy. Making sure that you're eating half of every plate and snack is vegetables and fruits, because those are the main sources for a lot of our fiber that we need to keep our gut healthy. It's a great source for many of the nutrients that keep our heart and our brain happy. If you choose dairy, we encourage that it's a low fat, and by that I mean either non-fat or perhaps 1%, whether that's in a yogurt, a cottage cheese, or a milk. And then looking at your yogurts and other dairy products, making sure that there's not a whole bunch of added sugar to that. My friend Lori and I, if you remember, Lori is another dietitian, we say if your yogurt looks like dessert, it probably is dessert. And just because it says yogurt doesn't mean it's automatically healthy. So the salted caramel crunch Greek yogurt can pretty much guarantee you might as well just eat a cup of ice cream. Yep. So if it looks like dessert, it probably is. So look at your label, and not only looking at the low fat part of your dairy product, but also the sugar component as well. Healthy fats that are liquid at room temperature, primarily looking at olive oil, canola oil. Those are liquid at room temperature. You hear a lot about coconut oil, seems to be the thing, has been for a couple years. What is coconut oil at room temperature?
Solid.
It's solid. Yep, it looks pretty much like Crisco. Who remembers Crisco? I had a cooking teacher who would always tell me fat carries flavor, so that's why you use Crisco.
Right.
And I can't do it. Can't get past it. Nope, can't dip my hand in that container. However, coconut oil is so good for your hair, for your nails, for your dog's nose. It's really good for external purposes because it's a fat. It's a solid fat that we absorb, and it's good for moisturizing. It is not good for clogging up our arteries. Okay, keep that in mind. With the Mediterranean diet, we want to limit our salt and our sugar and our saturated fat intake. So that might be for some people just not adding salt to your meal. That might be for some others really looking at not having any products or processed foods with a lot of added sodium. So if you use canned beans, that you want to look for the low sodium beans, that you want to rinse them and let them drain before eating them. So we all have a little bit of flexibility within there based on our personal health and what our goals are. With the Mediterranean diet, we suggest alcohol in moderation. This does not mean if you don't drink, you should take it up. It does not mean that, well, it says I should drink red wine, and so I should drink a lot of red wine because it's got those tannin and it's supposed to be heart healthy. The research is somebody drinking a lot of wine, and we're talking barrels in order because in proportion to what the research, the test they did. So if you're going to drink in moderation. And then the idea of whole foods versus processed foods. And so the way we sometimes describe this, a whole food or real food, is something that our grandparents would recognize. So think about that. There's so many products out there that if you put it on a plate in front of somebody that was born in the 1900s would be like, I have no idea what you're trying to feed me right now. Think about a Taki or some of those other chips or some sort of processed roll, which is so good. I'm not going to deny that some of these foods are very tasty, but I know my grandparents would probably be like, I have no idea what you're feeding me, and that's not okay with me. But think about a corn tortilla. We all know what a corn tortilla looks like. It's been around for ages, right? So think whole foods, what we used to eat centuries ago, and that's going to provide you with a lot more nutrition. Okay, so the Mediterranean diet. The foods you choose in the Mediterranean diet are highly nutrient dense, lower in processed foods, helping to decrease inflammation in our body, which helps to lower our risk for heart disease, lower our risk for diabetes, and because it's helping to lower our inflammatory response to foods and improve our gut health, makes us happier, right? Okay. So here's some specific nutrients, and you have them on your handout that are linked. The iron that you would find in either meat and or dark green vegetables and eggs and then magnesium, potassium, selenium, vitamin A, B vitamins, vitamin C, and zinc. One of the common things that you see in many of these is that vegetables, right? Mm-hmm. Spinach, root vegetables, seeds, nuts, sweet potatoes, dark leafy greens, bell peppers, whole grains, legumes, and then that shellfish, those fatty fishes also. And what does that all link to? All of those things are found in a Mediterranean diet. So just some things to think about. So here's what I want you to think about. Here's the other factors to consider. So when I was doing all this research, I really had to stop, and it all makes common sense, right? If you're eating a healthy diet, you would be healthy. So what comes first, and that will be on another slide, but thinking through mental health conditions and the ability to adhere to a diet. So if you're not having a good day, how likely are you to choose the crisp green salad and chop up all your lovely colorful vegetables, sprinkle it with some nice crushed walnuts, and then toast a nice piece of rustic whole grain bread to have on the side? No, not very likely. That's when you want, and that's why we've turned food like ice cream and mac and cheese comfort food, because when we are struggling, we look for something that provides us comfort, which is usually processed food and or highly sugared foods or salty. We have our go-tos. So what that says to me is we've known this all along. If we have a term for those processed foods as comfort food, we know that when we aren't in a good mood, we turn to these easy to go-to foods. So how do we break that cycle is a question. I would also put out there that there's other factors such as those financial and environmental social determinants of health that impact the ability to get healthy food. And there's also definitely an appetite change for those that are up with some of the medications related to mental health disorders. So I'll share a story about this, why when I was thinking through this, it all makes such logical sense. So I have a someone in my family who is an addict and homeless time to time. And I can always tell, I've learned, that they all carry big gulps. They always have a big gulp cup. And I didn't ask why, I figured out why. Because it's calories that they can refill for 89 cents. And their taste buds have changed because of medication, so they have a sweet tooth. So now this person who is struggling with their mental health is adding to it because they can't hold a job, they don't have a home, so they're looking for the cheapest food and what they can find, which are things like soda and chips and things of that nature. So that's not helping it any, correct? That's making it worse. But how do you stop that cycle, and which came first? So it makes me kind of wonder, how do we stop that cycle? So when we are struggling ourselves and we don't want to make ourselves that beautiful fresh green salad and chop up all those beautiful vegetables, what can we do? So that's something to think about. What comes first? Is it the food or is it the mental health? And how do we make it food first versus letting how we're feeling dictate what we eat? So there's this idea of decision fatigue. And what that means is at the end of our day, or when we're really struggling through a week, that we don't want to make a decision. We don't want to have to decide what we're going to cook. We don't want to have to decide what temperature to put this oven at so that I can cook my fresh fish. We just want to stop and grab a Happy Meal because it's happy. Kidding. So how to break this cycle is to plan, is to know that we need tools, that you can't just count on, I'm going to make a good decision tomorrow, so I don't need to have a plan. I don't need to have stuff ready in the refrigerator. I'm just going to do it tomorrow because I'm going to start my diet tomorrow. What's going to make tomorrow any different than today? If you have a plan, that's what's going to make it different. And I always tell people when they come to me for nutrition counseling is no matter what I say or tell you, until you feel the effects of your healthy food choices, until you start to feel better, until you start feeling those energy lows or those mood swings, nothing I say is going to make a difference to you. You need to feel, because we as humans are more likely to continue doing something that's pleasurable to us, right? That's easy for us. It's great to go out walking, but when it gets hot, do we go? Not unless you know, not unless you already feel the benefits and you're willing to get up a little bit earlier or walk inside, do something a little bit different because you feel so much better by walking. Same thing goes for food. We need to have a plan, and you need to start to recognize, we need to start to recognize how we feel after eating certain foods. Does anybody pay attention to how you feel? Some shaking heads. It really shocks me when I hear people saying, well, I know that I shouldn't eat this, this, and this because it makes me feel really bad. Well, then why are you eating it? Well, because I really like it. Okay, well, then it can't make you feel that bad. I don't, so, because for me, if something makes me feel bad, that's the end. I'm never eating that again. And actually, a lot of times I tell myself things make me feel bad when they really don't, because I shouldn't be eating that. That chocolate really makes me, feel terrible. So that works sometimes, not always. But to really start to pay attention to how we're feeling, both physically and mentally, that's when we start to make changes to what we're eating. When we start to have a plan, because we anticipate that we're going to have some decision fatigue, that we anticipate it's going to be a really busy week, and I can't rely on myself to just whip up something healthy after I've had a really busy week. So that's when meal planning comes into play. That's when shopping ahead and prepping some of those fresh food items. Having bell peppers all nicely chopped up, or mushrooms ready to go. Something like that. Or even if you're going to rely on frozen vegetables, that's fine too. Have them in your freezer. Know what you're going to do. Have a plan. Have the things that you need to make that plan easy. You need the easy button. And then food can start to come first, and that affects our mental health. And it's not instantaneous. It's not like the Snickers bar commercial. We're not going to take a bite of those fresh vegetables and whole grain rice, and we're automatically going to be like, oh, this is the best day ever. We also have to have some recognition that it is our gut. How happy is our gut? And that takes a little while to change that microbiota. And so you need to have a little patience and stick with it and continue and have that plan until you really start to feel better. Until you feel better, you need to be proactive about it. We also have a lot of things around cultural norms that we have to take into consideration. Food is very social, right? When you have visitors come into town, what's the first thing you want to do? Well, I want to take you here to eat. Or when you go back to visit someplace, that's my thing. I'm like, okay, well, I need to go to this restaurant. I'm going to meet these people at this restaurant. So food is social. We celebrate holidays with food. So how do we incorporate that into keeping our mental health well? And that's by everything in moderation. That's by predominantly eating diets that are filled with fruits and vegetables and whole grains and healthy sources of proteins and fats and real food. Something else to think about for the women in the room. Thank you, men, for coming. I never have hardly men in my talk, so I appreciate it. But something else to think about is, so here's how it goes. Women have higher rates of GI motility issues, part related to our estrogen and progesterone. So when our hormones start to change through menopause, that all changes, and we should notice some changes in our GI function. Women have more easily activated immune systems, meaning we are more likely to have inflammatory responses. Women have a longer GI tract. I did fact check all this too. Have a longer GI tract. That's which relates to how much longer it takes for us for things to move through our GI tract. Women have a higher rate of anxiety and depression. Now, I'll be the negative Nelly and say, well, because women are more likely to speak up and go seek health care when they are having issues than men are. Sorry, men. So perhaps that's why they have a higher rate that we know of. But I think it's pretty intriguing to think about that GI connection. If we already have more propensity to having GI issues because of these other factors, something to think about. And there's actually a whole new kind of line or sub-specialty in nutrition, and it's called nutrition psychiatry, which I think is really super cool because food is medicine. So how are we going to use it not only to keep people from increasing their health risk for chronic diseases and other diseases by eating healthier, but how can we use food and food supplements to improve and support people's mental health journey? So there's a lot of those, like the studies that I read, and they're just still completely correlative that food is an efficacious treatment when somebody is having a mental health occurrence, whether it's anxiety, depression, or suicidal ideation. And it makes sense though, but how do you get somebody who is super depressed to choose healthy food? So we got to catch it before you even get there. So keeping our gut healthy, thinking about how do we fit in all of those social impacts of food, both celebratory and also for people that don't have access to healthy food. How do we create more accessibility? How do we learn to eat within our cultural norms and still enjoy food? So there's a lot there to think about. Okay, so the recommendations. What do you do about it? I told you we want to plan our meals. We want to not skip meals, particularly breakfast. I don't care if we're kids or not, we should be eating breakfast for better glucose and energy balance so that we don't get hangry. That we choose real food versus processed foods so that we can decrease our inflammatory responses and improve our GI health. That we want to include lean protein in every meal and snack to help with that glucose stabilization. So again, remember, if we just eat a whole bunch of sugar or a whole bunch of carbohydrate, our body processes it really fast. That protein helps to slow down how fast that glucose enters our bloodstream. Make half your plate vegetables and fruit, both for the fiber as well as for the prebiotics that help to feed all those healthy microbes in our gut. Try to incorporate fatty fish at least twice a week for those omega-3 fatty acids. And then you can talk with a primary care provider about any supplements beyond just a multivitamin. So for older adults, we often need a B vitamin supplement. We might need a vitamin D supplement. Most healthcare providers are now testing for both of those pretty regularly, especially, in Arizona, we see a lot higher occurrence of vitamin D deficiency because we're all so good about covering up sunscreen and staying out of the sun when we actually need a little bit of sunlight, but we can also get it in our diet. Okay. Isn't that a cute picture? All right, so questions, and don't make them hard, Maya.
Thank you, Mary. So I have a couple of questions that came in. One is about maybe salt, right? Salty foods. We know that that's always a challenge. Can you hear me?
Yes, we just turned you down a little bit.
Oh.
You were yelling at us.
So when you're craving a salty snack, what are some options for somebody? That can be a comfort item, a comfort food. So what are some options for somebody if they're looking for maybe a salty, craving sort of a salty snack?
A salty snack. Well, okay. If somebody is looking for a healthier version of a salty snack, but they don't have high blood pressure, okay, that would be pretzels. You could dip pretzels in some hummus because then you're getting your protein and your salty snack, but you're not eating a chip that would be fried. If, however, you do have high blood pressure and you should be avoiding the salt that would be occurring on a pretzel, you could choose a whole grain salt-free cracker. You could make your own tortilla chips out of those corn tortillas. You bake them in first you should shake them in a little olive oil and put a little pepper on them and maybe a little oregano or basil or some other non-salt kind of herb mix. Shake it up, throw it on a cookie sheet and bake those. Then they get crisp. And you could dip that in some hummus. There's your option for a salty.
Those are great alternatives.
You can also do the air pop popcorn with some pepper and some Parmesan cheese.
Awesome. Okay, I love that. Okay. How can we maintain flavor while reducing unhealthy ingredients like sugar or fat?
Oh, well, say that again. How can we
maintain flavor? How do we maintain the flavor while reducing our unhealthy ingredients like sugar and fat?
So it would depend on the food, but you could substitute perhaps some fresh fruit for a sweet flavor. You can use those herbs and spices to reduce your salt intake. You can sort of think outside the box where you might substitute a fried or something that would require butter for cooking. Here's an example. Okay, so this is sort of healthy, sort of not healthy, but a grilled cheese. Let's just start with something super easy. Grilled cheese, normally you slap some butter on there and you throw it in a pan, you fry it, you melt the cheese. What happens if you toasted the bread and then put a slice of cheese on and then just warmed that up in the oven for a few minutes? Then you don't have any butter, but the cheese isn't great and healthy, but still, let's talk about moderation. We changed something. Some change is better than nothing. So it kind of depends on what you're eating, but there's always, if you think through it, if you're looking for something sweet, fruit is a great alternative. If you're looking for something salty, other herbs and pepper is a really great alternative there. And then if you're looking for alternative baking, rather than frying or using butter, air fryers are a great option. Convection ovens are a great option.
Oh, great. Okay. So that sort of leads me to my next question about portion control. So what tips do you have for portion control when you're indulging in a comfort food?
Okay. Here's my number one portion control tip. Never ever eat from the package. Never ever think you're going to stop after just 2 crackers or 2 potato chips or a handful of M&Ms. It's not going to happen ever. So pre-portion out your snack, your indulgent, and be present for that indulgence. Don't eat it while you're watching TV, reading a book, scrolling on your phone, driving. Sit with it, recognize what you're eating, and enjoy it. Be present for it, and do it with purpose.
Yes, or your ice cream, right? Your little pint of ice cream, right?
You're no. No. And the other thing is people we eat with our eyes, so make it pretty. Like if you're going to eat your ice cream, your half a cup of ice cream, Maya, put it in a 2-cup. Or, and use like a little spoon so it goes farther.
Good. I like the little spoon idea.
Use some edible flowers. Make it beautiful.
Good. Okay, my last question is about what strategies do you recommend for meal planning that can support better mood and mental health?
That's a great question. So I recommend picking a day of the week that is consistently going to work for you. Consistency is the key for us to creating habits. Pick a day, set aside an hour that you are going to plan out your meals. With that, then you're going to write a list of ingredients. What do I need? And then you're going to go grocery shopping and get those ingredients and prep them so that they're all ready to go. If it requires chopping up vegetables, if it requires cooking some meat ahead of time, set aside some time to do that meal prep in conjunction with that planning. Or if you want to look in your refrigerator first and say, what do I have? That's usually how I go about it. And say, okay, well, I've got fish and I've got some leftover ground turkey and I have all of these vegetables and some beans. So here's what I'm going to plan for the next, I usually do it in 3-day increments. So plan it out, but connect it with either what you're going to go buy from the store right then or what you already have in your cupboards and refrigerator.
Great. Thank you, Mary. I think that's all the questions that I have from online. I'm going to wrap up with our online audience and turn it over to you for any questions in person.
Jen would like you to wait 1 minute.
We had a call-in question.
There's a call-in question.
Okay.
They had a question about when you were talking about high-level amounts, what that means.
High-level amounts of...
It was at one point when you were talking, so is there like a good place they can go to get measurements or like a chart to see for like high level amounts of the good and bad ingredients in foods?
Oh, in food? Well,
yeah.
So you're going to look at your food label. And when you're looking at your food label, you want to make sure that you're looking at both the sugar, and now food labels have to have added sugar. So when we're talking about food, there's both sugar that occurs naturally. So let's talk about milk. Milk just white milk will have sugar, but then if you look at chocolate milk, it will have sugar, and then it will have added sugar because they're adding the chocolate syrup to it. So you want to read your labels. You want to look at the sodium content. And you want to make sure that you're looking at that fat content as well, which is up a little bit higher, and look at total fat versus saturated fat versus those mono, and sometimes they'll list a polyunsaturated fat. So the food label is really your go-to.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. Now I will turn it over to you for your in-person audience to ask any questions, and I'll wrap it up with our online audience. Thank you for being here. Thanks again for being here today for Mood Food. We are back tomorrow. We've got actually 2 presentations tomorrow. Our first will be the art of minimally invasive hernia repair, and that is with Jason Nielsen, TMC1 general surgeon. His presentation is Wednesday, September 25th at 10 a.m. And then in the afternoon, we will have Fran West with us from Center for Neurosciences. She will be doing our last fall risk presentation, and it is called Balancing on Air, Peripheral Neuropathy, and Fall Risk. If you are interested in attending either one of these presentations, please give us a call in the office. The phone number is 520-324-1960. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.